Hello, my name is Grover. I am one of the founders of PhotoShelter, and we have a really special webinar today with Blake Discher, the right way to negotiate with clients. Now, I saw Blake at ASMP's SB3, the Strictly Business 3 conference, not so long ago, and he gave a presentation that was really inspiring, and I saw so many people walk away with really useful information. I always felt that negotiating with clients, people tend to it's a scary prospect for most photographers because they don't know what to say. They generally feel out of control, and I think it's because mostly because they're unprepared. They're really unprepared for the negotiating process. And what Blake was able to do was, through his own experiences as a photographer, he was able to explain, processes and prepare people for the negotiating process in a way that was really understandable for everyone. So a little background: Blake and I go back a long way. We actually were freelance photographers together, working in Detroit, and we met while we were freelancers for the Associated Press. He's still based in Detroit. He's an editorial advertising People annual reports photographer, but he's also a teacher, consultant, and speaker. He specializes in negotiations, estimating, SEO, and marketing for photographers. So I need to turn things over to Blake.
All right, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Everybody see that screen, Grover, you think?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. I always start my presentations with this. I'm a photographer, like Grover said, based in Detroit here, mostly annual reports and corporate brochures, and I don't think it's any secret that business here in Detroit was dismal for the last about 2.5 years, and it's just not coming back, so that's good. And one of the things that I always say is that, there's no silver bullet, there's no magic bullet to this whole negotiating process and trying to come up with pricing and things like that, but I think it's important for the established photographers that are out there to share some knowledge out there. I think that they're just as responsible for the eroding marketplace by not sharing information with emerging photographers, and so that's one of the things that motivated me to get out and do a little bit of speaking. So PhotoShelter called this the right way to negotiate. I don't know that there's a right way to negotiate, but like I said, I'm going to share with you kind of where we're at right now and that sort of thing, and then talk about some specific negotiating. I'm going to do a big picture on negotiating in general, and then I'll give you my workflow as far as how I, kind of a neat trick on how I do my workflow as far as talking to new prospects, people that I haven't worked with at all yet when the phone rings. So, where we're at right now is pretty much the smoke and mirrors have disappeared from our industry at all. Time was when we would show up with a Hasselblad that the client had never seen, or in fact our subject had certainly never seen, and we were peeling Polaroids in those days, and there was some mystique to that, and everything that we did was kind of not available to our clients and or our subjects, and all that has changed. I mean, I show up to a shoot sometimes, and the subject has the CEO of the company that I'm photographing has a better camera than I do. And so what that has led to really is that the cost of entry to our business has gotten lower and lower to the point where anybody can get into it, and we're in a situation now, really we're up against amateurization and crowdsourcing. And I think we're in the days of it's good enough. It only has to be good enough for certain clients. And I think that there's really two ways to increase your revenue in this business, and very simply, you can either work more or you can get better clients. And I think one of the keys to success is to get better clients. And a real good example of this crowdsourcing is person goes out. Actually, it's Time magazine, and this is a cover that happened, I think, a couple of years ago now, and maybe you've heard about this already, but so the editors at Time magazine go to Flickr, and they find this image on Flickr. And just to give you some ideas, back when this was published, a stock photo for the cover of a magazine, the circulation the size of Times, would have been about $3,000. If they assigned it, I've never shot for time, but I've been told by people who have that if they assigned it, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,500 for a cover. And they ended up paying a gentleman who sells furniture for a living in Culver City, California, $30 for this image. And I think that that speaks volumes. We're in trouble. And editorial is one of the segments in our business where the prices have eroded the most because these cameras today just they all take fantastic images. So I think really what we have to do is to realize that about 95% of the working professional photographers out there can satisfy the needs of any client that's out there, or of most clients, I should say. And so I think it's incumbent on us to, in order to get better clients, you have to differentiate yourself from everybody else out there. You want to be that guy in the middle with the psychedelic socks. And basically what it's all about there is figuring out what it is that you can do that your competitors can't do. And it could even be your people skills, although that's hard to convey in an initial phone call, but it could be your style. In a lot of cases, that's how people differentiate. It could be how you work, and that you can convey in a phone call. We work fast, we're not disruptive at all to your company and things of that nature. I, on my website, show some examples of black and white images that have been put through a process that, you know, anybody that's listening can figure out how this stuff is done. But the point is that I'm showing it on my website. I'm showing the work that I want to get, not the work that I'm getting. I suggest that for anybody that's emerging, especially. I show this work on on the website really just to differentiate myself, and you'd be surprised how many people have hired me for this gritty black and white look. And it seems to, again, it seems to make the phone ring, and that's great. Quite often, people will call and they'll mention that they've seen, you know, this type of work on my website, even though they want something more run-of-the-mill. But this sort of thing gets them to pick up that phone call. One of the people that I really listen to faithfully and read faithfully is Seth Godin. And you know, I don't need to read this to you, but you can take a look at that. The most important sentence there is the last one. You're not selling a commodity unless you want to. If people really, just to summarize, if people don't want to pay, it's because you're not delivering enough value. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is really, what is your value? What do you bring to the party? What do you bring to the table? What is your value to that client? So there's another photographer in my building here in Detroit, and this is what she told my assistant one day when my assistant was asking her for some pricing help. If you charge cheap, they treat you cheap. And I have to tell you, it's exactly right. I position myself as one of the top 2 or 3 most expensive people in my market here, and what it led to is really climbing that corporate ladder. There's a perception out there that if you price too cheap, that you might not be as good as maybe what the client wants. So anyway, I just thought that was a great quote. And then a friend of mine, Peter Kaplan, I love this quote. I'm known for bending over backwards for my client, but I don't like bending over forward for them. If you don't know Peter, he's in fact, he just came out of heart surgery and he's doing well. So good luck, Peter. So I think really what we need to do is to you know, our computers are on all the time. We need to be prepared when the phone rings. As soon as I find out what company is on the phone, I immediately Google that company. I want to see exactly how they're using photography, how I think I might fit in, where I think they could, you know, I would respectfully submit to them some issues that I see with their photography and maybe make some suggestions. I think the most important thing there is that I want to become that person's teammate on the phone. I want to make some suggestions. And sure, there's going to be times when you don't get the job and your suggestions are going to be executed by another photographer for whatever reason. But still, I'm trying to create that feeling of the she and I, or he and I, being a team together, trying to solve their problem. Because the person that's calling you, by the time they call you, the pieces, if it's a brochure, for example, the piece has been written, and now they just have 4 slots that they need pictures for. So I try to find out as much as I can. I find out about that company, ask people, in between the time I take the initial phone call and then call back with pricing, see what I can do is to find out about that company and find out exactly how they're using photography. I think this is a good example here. A company called Remedy is an ad agency, a small ad agency out of Chicago. So you can see this grab is from 2007, but it really illustrates what I'm talking about here as far as doing a little bit of work while you're on the phone. So, you know, I'm looking at the website, and you can see that it's, you know, it's from a design standpoint, it's a little bit out there, and they're not just using Times as a font, and there's some design involved there. So I would say that they're, you know, they're a sophisticated client. And the lady that I'm talking to, Jessica Beach, and I noticed that her pet peeve is loud chewing, and I just filed it away. And we're talking back and forth, getting to know more and more and more about what she needs, and file that away. And then when I get back with her with the estimate, or to talk about the estimate, and I'll talk about my specific workflow in a bit. But when I call her back, I say, you know, at the end of the whole conversation, I throw in something like, you know, and Jessica, by the way, neither myself or my assistant chew loudly. And it just makes the conversation a little bit lighter. She laughed. She said, you know, nobody's ever noticed that before. And we ended up getting a job. It was for a hospital in Kalamazoo that was their client. And it turned out to be a pretty good shoot. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that your negotiating starts the minute you pick up the telephone. I know there's other photographers that answer the phone studio, and I think it's important to answer that phone professionally, and that's really when the whole sales process starts. So I think if you can, you know, there's this old saying in sales and negotiating is, you know, you need to know the marketplace, and whoever has the most knowledge is going to win. I think this is as far as trying to figure out what the prices are. Prices that you can charge. I know that people have called me, other photographers in town have called me for pricing. Or I should say I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that other photographers have called me. I can kind of tell by the questions they ask. They ask different questions than what a client would ask. Play detective. I would get involved in associations. I'm involved with ASMP pretty heavily, but whether it's ASMP or APA and NPPA, POMA, there's a ton of those kind of acronyms out there. The best thing that has happened for me with my association with ASMP is that when I go to the chapter meetings here in my area, I have made friends with people that I can trust not to take my clients, and that I can ask, you know, if I start to get in over my head on how to price something because it's a category I haven't worked in yet, I can ask them for some help on pricing, and they're pretty forthcoming. I started out as a photojournalist, like Grover said, and then I made the jump to PR, and then corporate, and now annual reports. And I remember as I was moving up in those different categories or those different spaces that we work in, pricing was a mystery for me, and that proved to be real helpful, is knowing some people. There's listservs out there and things like that also. Each of the organizations has listservs that are really useful. So you want to know the marketplace. You know, I know, for example, I'll give you a good example. If we're shooting in Detroit, because everybody in Detroit is operating and estimating from a position of fear, not everybody but most people, the pricing here is quite low. And if I am estimating a job where I'm going to fly, say, to Seattle for a shoot, that estimate for sure is going to be higher. And I'm not talking about just the airfare and everything else, but what I'm talking about is the creative fee and the licensing fee. Those are going to be higher. I'm talking about most of the creative fee. It's going to be higher than I would be able to get in Detroit here. So that's what I'm talking about when I say know the marketplace. Detroit is a depressed market. It's just coming out of that, like I said at the start here. And so it helps to know where I need to be in this market in order to keep working in this market. I think you need to ask yourself, what is it? Are there any special skills that you possess? Is there a reason, or is there equipment that you might have that puts you more in the driver's seat than anybody else? And again, really what we're talking about here is figuring out what's your value. The more value you have, generally speaking, the less you can be shopped as far as price goes, and the higher you'll be able to charge. And so to give you a couple of examples, I have some soundproof equipment. Motion pictures have come into Michigan pretty extensively. I shoot for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. My soundproof housing has gotten me jobs just because I'm one of the very, very few guys in this town that has that. So that's some specialized equipment that I have. Is there a relationship with the client already existing? Did that person come to you from a referral? If the person came to you from a referral, that person that referred you has pretty much pre-sold you. And so that's going to help you to charge what a fair rate would be, and possibly a little bit more. So keep those sorts of things in mind. Do you have special skills? The proximity to the shoot, in other words, are you close? There's no travel involved. Those sorts of things are real helpful. I think one of the things to keep in mind is, because we're operating, like I said, from a position of fear here, where the next job is so important, I think Nelson Bunker Hunt said it best: there's always another deal around the corner. And at some point, you're going to need to walk away from certain phone calls. I'll give you a good example. And if anyone has heard me speak, they've heard this story, so forgive me. But for those that haven't, a magazine out of New York calls, and there's a baby in Flint, Michigan, who survived a tornado. Basically, the tornado sirens go off, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night. The family goes down to the basement, then the all clear goes, and they go back up into their bedrooms. And sure enough, about a half hour later, here comes the tornado. So there's a baby up in the crib. He's about 9 months old at this time. And he gets, the roof gets torn off the house, and there goes the baby in the crib, and he falls mattress first, and then the baby, and then a bunch of rubble on top of him. So this magazine says, we really need to shoot this kid. So I go up there a couple of months later. Now he's 11 months old. And, they wanted to look dramatic, so I get down on the porch real low and shoot him with the sky up behind him, the sky from where the tornado came and everything, and send the pictures in. And about a week later, the art director calls and says, we don't really think he looks dramatic enough. We really wanted him standing. And so, he's only 11 months old. He's not walking yet. So I said, well, he had to sit because he doesn't walk. He can't stand. And so she said, but now the weather had gotten bad too, and she, honest to goodness, she said that she wanted Mom to put him on a coffee table in the living room, and we'll strip in a sky behind him, and Mom should have her hand behind him, and then when I'm ready to take the picture, Mom can pull the hand away, and I can take the picture, and then Mom can put the hand back. And so I'm wondering if my insurance is paid up, and it occurs to me that I need to walk away from this. So you'll hear me say in a bit that if you have to walk away, do it graciously. So what I said is, I said to the lady, I'm not comfortable with this. And she said, fine, if you're not, I'll get another photographer to do it. So I stayed calm. And I said, if you give me in writing that you won't use the images, I will not bill you. And she said, fine. So that all transpired. About a week later, she called and said, how much for the images? Apparently, they couldn't find anybody to do what they wanted. And so, we all remember those cartoons with the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder. And basically what I did there is just charge her what it would have been originally, and I managed to keep the client. So, if your gut tells you it's a bad deal, if your wedding, if your best friend asks you to shoot his wedding or her wedding, that's probably a bad deal. Ask me how I know about that as well. So one of the things I always talk about is that I want to be the guy in town that is the easiest to work with. And by that, I'm not talking about, like Peter says, bending over forward. I'm not talking about giving away everything, but what I want to do is I want to listen to that client carefully, and I want to find out exactly what they need, and then find a way to give it to them, and find out a way to make it work. I know who the competitors are at my level. I ask the question, who else are you talking to? And oftentimes they'll let me know. And I can tell by the person that they give me the names, if they do, where I need to be in price. So I do want to, I want to get that conversation off on a good start. I want to make it personal. Not anything as trite as asking how the weather is in San Francisco, but something like that, and focus this conversation for a little short time away from the business at hand. I also think that if you look at any negotiating information, what they'll tell you is that we generally are poor listeners. And there's really three pitfalls of listening. And the first one is if you think talking is active and listening is passive, then you have it backwards. You really need to be a good listener in a negotiation. You know, my dad used to say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in proportion. And then I think the other thing is that poor listeners concentrate on what they're about to say. And so, you know, by that I mean we tend to jump into the conversation without letting the person finish their thoughts. We try to finish sentences for them, especially when we're first starting out. We're nervous on the telephone. That's a real thing. I've heard assistants who are starting out, I've heard them on the phone do that. And there's that count to 2 rule. Before you ask a question or answer a question, count to 2 and compose your thoughts, and then answer the question, and then ask another question. And then I also think that emotional filters prevent you from hearing what we don't want to hear. Emotional filters prevent you from hearing what you don't want to hear. And so the best example of that is if you have a client ask you for a buyout, and this happens more and more and more these days. And I think as soon as you get into the conversation where you're going to tell the client why they don't need a buyout, in other words, I've heard photographers say, well, you should say they don't really need it on the side of buses in China, so why would they want to license that? As soon as you go down that road, you've lost that client, that potential client. They want to think back to that easy button, figure out a way to make it work. And a buddy of mine, a friend of mine, Joe Pobereskin, photographer, used to be in Jersey and now he's in Chicago. He has a great answer to that whole buyout question. And I'm paraphrasing, and I know I get it a little bit wrong every time I say it. But basically what Joe's reply to that is, client asks him for a buyout. He says, buyouts, sure, we do them all the time. Tell me exactly what you need. And then when the client goes through whatever he says, that's what Joe licenses the images for. He listens. He licenses for exactly what they say. He doesn't get into a long thing where he's going to educate the client. I don't feel that I need to be the guy evangelizing on behalf of this industry and letting all of our clients know that there's no such legal term as buyout, that sometimes the client means they want a copyright transfer, sometimes they don't, sometimes really all they want is unlimited usage in perpetuity. And I don't want to get into that conversation. Just tell me what you want. I'll license it for exactly what you say, and I'll price it accordingly. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying just give them whatever they want. There's value in that extended license or in that additional usage, so you price it accordingly. So I think that, you know, keep the easy button in mind and go ahead and license to whatever level of usage the client wants. And more I have clients asking me for unlimited usage in perpetuity, and all I do is I price it accordingly. So, being an attentive listener. All right, so basically what we're doing is let the client talk first. Let the potential client tell you his or her story first. You need to ask questions and ask open-ended questions, not just yes or no. Get them talking. Get them talking about the project. Don't forget about the count to 2 thing. Be alert for nonverbal cues. And I think the real important thing there is if they sound rushed on the phone, then you're not going to be asking about the weather in San Francisco or whatever it is that you're doing some small talk up in the beginning. If they sound rushed because everybody's doing the job of 3 people because of all the layoffs here in Detroit, then you need to cut to the chase. So those nonverbal cues are super valuable. What I'm trying to do is, you know, I don't interrupt, of course, just like you learned in kindergarten. You can't talk and listen at the same time. And so I'm listening constantly, and I don't trust my memory. I have a thing called the negotiating cheat sheet, and all it does is it keeps me on track. There's a link at the end of the presentation that you can email to get that, my negotiating cheat sheet. They're on my desk. I go through, I capture all the information that I need to get from the client right in that first phone call. So barriers to clarity is an important thing. I think the biggest one for us is that we have a fear of being disliked because we're artists. And I think that we all need to remember it's not personal, it's business. And I think that we all get hung up in this fear of rejection. We don't prepare enough. We leave out the details. We don't permit questions. Those sorts of things, barriers to clarity are huge. And keep in mind, like I said, it's not personal, it's business. Their job, that person on the other end of the phone's job, is to get you to work as cheaply as possible. Your job is to turn them upside down and shake every last nickel out of their pocket. So we're all just doing our jobs. And I can't stress enough how important it is not to burn bridges. Don't burn bridges, because you never know where that client's going to end up. I've had many, many clients that have changed jobs and have called me back later and said, I'd like to work with you on this project. I couldn't work with you 3 years ago, but on this project, it's a perfect fit, and now I have some budget to work with you. So don't take anything personally at all. Ask quality questions. One of the first question I ask is, how did you hear about me? I want to know if my web marketing is working. I want to know if it's a word of mouth referral. The second question I ask sometime after they're starting to tell me all about the project is, do they have a budget? And of course, they're going to say they don't, about 80% of the time. But the 20% of the time that they do tip their hand, it's huge, because in many times, several times, not many, but several times, their budget has been higher than where my estimate would have been. And I could give you examples, but I won't because we're short on time. But there are a lot of times when that question, have you set a budget? So then let's just say they say no. So you're talking a little bit more. You're learning more about their job. She's or he is getting more comfortable with you, starting to like you a little bit, like what you do, like some of the suggestions that you're making. You can ask that same question, but phrase it like this. So, you know, this project, Emily, sounds like a great fit. I'm really confident that you and I would work well together. I'm confident the images I produce are exactly what you're looking for. This sounds like something I really want to work on. Tell me, where do I need to be? You've asked the same exact question. You phrase it a little bit differently. It's further into the relationship, if you will, and you just might get an answer. And she may say, well, you know, our budget, we'd like to keep it under $3,000. All right. Well, if that's the case, I'm at $29.99. So that question is a real valuable question. I like to give the big picture. In other words, talk about what the project's going to be. I like to describe how we're going to tackle it. Explain to her what the next step is going to be. That's all. I'm being very clear. And I'm also explaining to her, generally speaking, my workflow is, I'm mentioning at this point that I'm going to send an agreement over for signature. I call it an agreement and not a contract. I don't want the legal guys to have to get involved, so I send over an agreement. I don't want the first time for anyone to see my terms and conditions to be on the back of my invoice. We don't start working until we have a signed contract. And so I let them know that that's going to be coming down the somewhere before we start shooting. So 3 keys to a win-win. I think one of the important things is don't talk about price in the very beginning of the phone call. Leave price for that second phone call after you've sent the estimate. If you focus the conversation on price, the price will fall. If you focus the conversation instead on your value, the price will likely rise. So if you focus the conversation on price, the price will go down. If you focus the conversation on your value or your differentiation or why you're better than everybody else out there, the price may go up. I'll give you a quick example. So somebody calls, and I'm in Detroit here. They want me to shoot in a manufacturing facility. Person on the other end of the phone is new to her job. She just has to hire somebody to go shoot in an assembly line situation. So as soon as I hear that, what I'm talking about with that person is how I get it that if a light falls into the assembly line and they have to shut it down, it's $250,000 or $100,000 per minute that line is down. It's huge money if they have to shut down that line. And man, I don't want to be the guy that causes that down. And I say to her that I know that, and for that reason, we don't bring light stands. We bring extra assistants to hold lights. So we're not going to have an accident. That's music to her ears. She's like, this guy's done this a million times. He knows all about it. And so what I'm trying to instill is confidence on the part of that buyer that I'm the right guy for the job. Now, I have to tell you, every other corporate shooter in this town knows that. They know that, you know, that it's a disaster if a stand goes into the assembly line, and they probably use assistants to hold lights and things like that. But the difference is that I'm talking about it. I'm talking about what it is that I bring to the party that the other guys don't. In fact, they may, but I'm talking about it. So that's huge. So don't talk about price. Realize that the person you're talking to's needs are very different than yours. You need to figure out what his or her needs are because you don't know what they are. So now you're out of control. I've heard assistants who are making the transition to being assistants, moving into being photographers. They start to lose it, sweating profusely, starting to sound like Mickey Mouse on the telephone. If you're getting emotional, you need to pause this conversation. All right. If they're asking you for a concession, you don't know quite how to handle it, you need to pause. You're under pressure, you need to pause. And my favorite pause is the FedEx guy. And basically how this works, and I've used it and it works, I say, now I'm out of control in the conversation. You know, the worst thing to do is to get off the phone and figure out, man, I should have said this, I should have said this. Well, now you got a chance to do that. You get a chance exactly to do that. And so how this goes is this. Hey, you know what? My doorbell just rang and I'm expecting a FedEx package. Is there a chance that I could get this package? Let me get this package and I'll call you right back. Hang up the phone, collect your thoughts, talk to your assistant, talk to your colleague that's at your office or at your studio for some help, get some help on the conversation. You got about 3 or 4 minutes. And then you call the client back, you thank them for giving you that opportunity to collect your package, and there you go. And now you're back on track again. So the FedEx guy is your buddy. And you get a pass that way because everybody knows how important it is when they get a FedEx. Everybody gets excited when they get a FedEx package. So everybody will give you a pass for the FedEx guy. All right. Let's see here. Before you close the deal. So here's one of the things, and I'm going to get into my specific workflow, but before you need to, before you figure out where you're going to be in price and everything else, you need to figure out is this sale, I'll call it a sale, because I think we're all sales, we all need to be salespeople first, photographers second. I think that's critical. Does this transaction, does this sale further your long-term goals? All right. If a newspaper calls you up and they want to pay you $200 for the whole day to go out and do something, might that day be better spent tweaking your website, tweaking your portfolio, working on your PhotoShelter website, doing whatever it is, than taking that job? Does this job further your long-term goals? Is it going to give you a portfolio deal? And of course, your cash flow is all that plays into that factor, of course. But I think that that's the important thing to know. Does it fit your business goals? Does it fit your personal goals? And does it fit your vision statement? Your vision statement is, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 3 years? Do you want to get out of shooting editorial photography? Do you want to move, up that ladder, so to speak? And so think about that. So win-win. I think a couple of things to keep in mind is you need to figure out exactly what the objections are, if there are objections. One of the things that I always do is ask the client at the end of that initial phone conversation, do you have any questions of me? It gives them an opportunity to say, well, I was talking to this other photographer and he was talking about renting a genie lift for this shot. And then I need to figure out, well, maybe I should have rented a genie lift. I should have been talking about that. Or maybe I can say something, backpedal and say something like, well, we're just going to bring a giant ladder. So those are all things that can help you to figure out what else that person has been, who else she's been talking to, what else other photographers have fed her as far as information goes, and things like that. What is it? How can you create that feeling of win-win? How can you convince her that you're the right person? If in a perfect world, what would this deal look like to you, Mrs. Client or Miss Client, Mr. Client? So it's just all about conversation. How about if we did this? So just extend that telephone call. Studies have shown the longer that phone call lasts, the more likely you are to be the successful person in getting the job. So here's some glitches, all right? I think the biggest glitch that we get into is that we need to make sure that we're talking to the decision maker. And this is huge. If the person calling you is not the decision maker and you don't know that, then you're counting on that person to paraphrase for you and probably leaving out valuable information. And what you need to do is to get to the decision maker. And a really, really cool way to do that is to say, listen, Mary, is there anybody else that I could send samples of my work to? If Mary gives you email addresses of a couple other people, chances are, if those people, if that person, that single person, is not the decision maker, he's going to be involved in that process. She wants you to send samples to the other people as well. And it's a real non-offensive way to figure out if you're talking to the decision maker or not. You need to get to the decision maker. Now, if you can't do that, then what you need to do is just like they do for politicians. You need to help that person to be your teammate and to be your salesperson for whoever this decision maker is. So what you want to do is give them talking points so that that person goes to his boss and says, hey, you know what, this guy Blake Discher, I have to tell you, he's probably going to be the highest guy because he told me he is, because this is what I say. Hey, John, you know what, I'm going to put together this estimate. If I have any questions, can I give you a call? And of course, he's going to say yes. And I'll say, you know, I have to tell you, if I'm not the highest, I'm going to be one of the highest, but here's why. And that is a great way to get into talking about your value. Here's why I might be the highest. So you need to be talking to the decision maker. Don't fall into this whole thing where they're going to give you a lot more work if you do this job cheap, because it's just not true. They're going to find another fish for the next one. That's the oldest line in the book. You know, they don't have time for a contract. That's crazy. There's always time for a contract with email and iPhones and iPads and all that stuff. You know, electronic signatures are valid now, so all that stuff. And then I think if you're going to walk, take the high road. All right, don't burn bridges because you never know. Let me talk about my workflow. So basically, if the client calls for a quote, I ask about the budget, like I said. Judy Herman, a friend of mine out east, her question, what she does is she tries to figure out the level of service that the person wants. In other words, you're trying to figure out what sort of budget. Are they going to want a makeup artist? You know, if you go and you're going to do some shooting of executives, do they want a makeup artist? If they say yes, then they probably have budget. Judy says, you know what, I'd like to just get a sense of where this job is at. Is this a Super 8 motel job? Or is this a Ritz-Carlton job? And so you can use those sorts of examples. Is it a white glove or a bare bones thing? And I think all of this negotiation sort of thing really gets down to your style, your talking style on the phone. I've been doing this for 20 years. There's a certain level of confidence I have in my voice. I know when to back down. I know when to joke. Those sorts of things. That just comes with experience. So I'm asking about the budget, and I think the most important thing to do is not give the price on the initial phone call. You'll always get the guy that says, can you just give me a ballpark? Can you give me a ballpark price? And, you know, I would never say this, but I jokingly think to myself, yeah, Yankee Stadium was like, what, $300 million, right? Don't give a price on the initial phone call, because here's my workflow. Client calls for the quote. I get all the information that I can, and I say, hey, John, now listen, I'm going to put together an estimate for you. I want to put a pencil to paper. If I have any questions, can I call you back? And of course, he's going to say yes, right? How many times has it happened where we sent the estimate out? If you're not the successful estimator, they don't call you back to let you know. You never hear from them again. You try to call them, you get their voicemail. So now he's my friend. He'll take my call. I call back with the quote, and here's how that works. I get the estimate all prepared. I'm ready to send it. I don't email it yet until I get him live on the phone. He said he would take my calls in case I had questions. As soon as I get John on the phone, I press the send button on my computer. Hey, John, I'm not lying. Hey, John, listen, I sent you that estimate, and I just thought I'd go over it with you. And now you have an opportunity to talk to him about the estimate and go over it bit by bit with him. So he's probably going to say, you know, I didn't get this yet. And now you tell one of the white lies. One of the, I hear 200 per month is what the average person tells. And now you say, well, you know, I've been having trouble with my email. Why don't you check your email? He says, oh, yeah, here it is. And now you have a chance to go over that estimate line by line by line. Listen for those nonverbal cues. Listen for his feedback and figure out where you need to be. I also think that now is the point that if you have to lower your price, you need to take something back. Super, super important. If you don't do that, then the client's wondering, why didn't you just give me his best price right up at front? In other words, if let's say the estimate is $2,000 and you have to come down a couple or $300. If you just do that carte blanche, then he's thinking, I'll guarantee you, somewhere in his mind he's thinking, why didn't he just estimate it at $1,700 if that's where he's going to settle for? But if you give away, if you take away, if you reduce the price, take something back. And it could be fewer shots. It could be, I just did a calendar job for a medical facility here. They lowered the budget on me from what it's been in past years. And instead of going to each person's house, we're going to get all the people together at the facility for 2 days. And I'm only shooting for 2 days now instead of 6 days. And so I took something back in exchange for that price reduction. So call back. It's an opportunity for them to tell you perhaps where where you need to be, where the other photographers are. After the job is done, if you want to really differentiate yourself, send a handwritten thank you note. Even if you don't get the job. If you didn't get the job, send a handwritten thanks. Hey, John, it was good talking to you about your project coming up. Sorry we couldn't work together this time. Please keep me in your files. I'll add you to my mailing list. You add that person to your email blast that you do every 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it is. And now you've differentiated yourself because they've received a snail mail handwritten card from you. We're all photographers. We have great images. You can do one-off cards on an Epson printer that look fantastic. So do that. Add the person to your email list, like I said. And then I think if you did the job, after the job is done, ask that person for referrals. Hey, Cheryl, listen, is there anybody else that you think of that I could call that might be interested in the kind of photography that I do? And if Cheryl gives you a name, immediately your next phone call is, and even if you get voicemail on the next phone call, hey, John, listen, I just did this great job for Cheryl, and Cheryl suggested I give you a call and maybe send you some samples of my work or come in and see you and show you some samples of my work. Referrals are huge. Just a couple more things here. This is a book by Tom Riley, as you can see. By now it's about 5 or 6 years old, probably. Tom Riley is a guy who talks about, he's one of these sales gurus, and basically he talks about how to add value to whatever it is you're selling. It's not photography-centric, it's not real estate-centric, it's whatever you sell, how to add value and how to sound confident on the phone. This is a great book. Because it's so old, it's on Amazon for like $9 now. It's ridiculously cheap. I actually had a guy hand this to me on an airplane. He's coming back from California, so it was like a 5-hour trip. And you get talking about what you do for a living. And the guy was reading this book, and as we're getting off the plane, he handed it to me and said, "Here, you need this. You need this more than I do." So anyway, I read it, and it turned out to be one of the best things that I've read in a long time. I like to close with this: the minute you settle for less than you deserve, you get even less than you settled for. That's, of course, is Maureen Dowd. And then the other thing I would tell you is, if you have colleagues in your studio, assistants, I would do some role playing. It'll sharpen your skills. It's that old story. I can sit here and tell you, how to play the piano, but until you sit your butt down on the chair there and start plinking at the keys, it's a whole different story. So make up some sample scenarios, and one person play photographer, one person play buyer, and practice practice how you handle objections and what you say and how you differentiate and why you're better than everybody else out there. That's it. I have if you send an email to photoshelterslides@gruzy.com. Gruzy is my blog on negotiating and sales and also web marketing. Send it to photoshelterslides@gruzy.com. An autoresponder will send you the slide deck and also my that cheat sheet that I was talking about. And that's it. Thank you all for listening. We wrapped up in 45 minutes, so that's amazing. So Grover, if you're there, I can take some questions if anybody has any or comments.
This is really great. I am here. And we have a whole bunch of questions. First, from Issa Alkindi. She says, what about rate cards? How do you deal with customers who are asking for them beforehand?
Yeah, that's a good question. I, for a long time, had pricing on my website. I just put it out there because I was tired of basically newspapers calling me and wanting to pay me $150 or $200, and I made it pretty clear on my website that I wasn't going to walk out the door for less than $750. And what it did was it pretty much pre-qualified anybody that called, because I know darn well they clicked on the pricing page. I since took off my pricing because I didn't want to be locked in, and I think that if you talk to most photographers will concur with that. There's a couple out there. That you can look to for pricing. Ross Sillers, I think it's Rosh, ROSH.com, has a calculator on his website. John Harrington has a calculator on his website. So there's a couple of guys that you can use for some guidance. I also should have mentioned Photo Quote is out there. Photo Price Guide is another one. So there's some pricing guides. As far as a rate card, I don't want to be locked into pricing. I don't publish a rate card. I want to estimate each job on its own merits. And I think that as you get more and more sophisticated clients, that's more and more necessary, because as you get more sophisticated clients, you're going to have to start letting those clients go down that were, you know, less paying clients. I'll guarantee you, if you don't do that, Joe's Muffler Shop on the corner that you've been doing work for is going to book you for a job and paying you, you know, $500 a day, and I don't charge by the day, I charge by the shot. Right when that client that you've been trying to get for a long time wants to hire you for $1,800 for the day, or, you know, $400 a shot or something like that. So yeah, I stay away from publishing rate cards, especially as you're moving up in client sophistication.
Okay, cool. I got a series of questions along the same lines here, specifically addressing asking people who else they're talking to. This one from Julie Feller. By asking clients who else they are talking to, do you think that question will have a negative effect on my reputation?
No, I don't think it'll have a negative effect on your reputation. I think you need to be prepared for the person to say, I'd rather not say. And in fact, you can couch that question by giving them an easy out. And you know, how I ask that question is, hey, you know, listen, if you don't mind me asking, who else have you talked to about this? And you know, it's one of those things where a little bit more than half the time they will not say, and sometimes they will say. But I don't think it bothers your reputation at all, and that's just my opinion. I haven't sensed that, at least, but it is helpful if they do answer it. Along those same notes, you know, if I share studio with people over the years, and I once shared a studio with a guy who, a couple times I heard him say, you know, I will, let me give you the name of the local college, because you can probably get somebody to work that cheap. And I think that that's a real sellout to both the college student and to our industry in general. I think if one of my big things is that if a student or an emerging photographer is just as qualified as I am, they ought to be able to get the same rates that I get. I think they don't have any idea what to charge, and you know, they're used to making minimum wage somewhere while they're going to school, and so, you know, to them, $500 is big money, when in fact that job might have been worth $2,500. So I think it's incumbent on us established photographers to help the emerging photographers to the best that we can. So.
Okay, cool. Another question from Joanne Barsanti. If they evade the budget question, how do you get around that? What's your next move?
Well, like I said, I would ask that question a little bit differently. I would let them know that, you know, that I would again sell them that this is, you know, I'm the guy for the job. You know, Debbie, I have to tell you, this is right up my alley. We just, you know, this is something that we do all the time, and where do I need to be? And that gets me a lot of success, I have to say. And, you know, if it doesn't, if they say, you know, just send me the invoice, or just send me the estimate, rather, then there's really not much I can do except for my knowledge of where this market is at. I know what Detroit's market will bear for, say, corporate brochure work. I know what it will bear for event photography. I don't do that much event photography, but I do have some very old clients that I still do that. I know what the market will bear. And that's really about all you can do. I don't have a better answer than that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Here's another one from Tom Parks. He says probably 90% of negotiations take part via email. I have clients that I've never met or spoken with. Any tips on handling a situation where a client simply asks for a price and comes straight back with an okay, thanks? How do you keep the conversation going?
Yeah, that's very difficult. I have people that do email the same thing, you know, and I can tell from my website. I use the address info@fireflystudios.com, so I know if their inquiry is coming from having just seen the website. I do not I take that back. I was going to say I never reply to those without having talked to the person first. Day before yesterday, I got one that said we wanted to do this shoot. We needed about 4 or 5 shots at this guy's office, and we have $300 to spend. And that one I did reply to, because there's no amount of talking on the telephone that's going to convince her that I'm worth more than that. She has a budget of $300. You know, I mean, shoot, even if she doubles it, which is going to be outrageously impossible for her to do because her boss is telling her to spend $300. I just replied, you know, I'm sorry, I respectfully declined to bid or to provide an estimate. Other than that, when I get a request via email, I just email them back saying, is there a good time that we can chat on the phone about this? I need to get more information before I provide you an estimate. And that's how I handle it. And if the person won't do that, I won't provide an estimate, because you just don't have enough information. I will guarantee you there is just not enough information in that initial email to find out exactly what they need. And I'm not talking about just what they're going to use it for. I'm talking about, you know, if they want 6 shots for a brochure that they're doing, I need to find out, are they all in the same facility? Are they all on the same day? What happens if it rains? There's a lot more questions that I need to get in from that client. And I email them back, or I'll call them up and see if they can spend some time with me. And if they don't, then I will not give them an estimate.
I mean, there's so many questions here. I'm trying to dig through them. This one I don't know if there's an answer to this one, but I'll ask you anyway.
Okay.
How do you pause the conversation? You know, like the FedEx guy thing. How do you pause the conversation if you're an in-person meeting?
I think it's time to go to the bathroom. No. You know, it's a good question. I don't know how you can do that and save face. You know, that whole in-person meeting thing is something that I've talked about before. Don't underestimate the value of FaceTime. You know, I'll get an email from a person in town, and they want an estimate, and if I can, I'll ask them if I can come in and show them some samples of work, because if you can get a face-to-face, you're much further in the driver's seat than anybody else is. But yeah, if you're in a face-to-face and you start to lose control of that conversation, I think you're in a little bit of trouble. You need to be fast on your feet for sure. I don't know that there's a real answer to that, and I mean, I'm being somewhat facetious, but it might be time for a potty break. I don't know.
Okay, Greg Vieira.
I'm sure whoever asked that. I was just going to say, I'm sure whoever asked that is rolling their eyes, but I don't have a good answer there.
No, I mean, that's what I said right up front. I don't think there is an answer. But,
yeah.
So Greg Viergi, I don't know, I'm butchering that last name, asks, how do you answer an inquiring phone call that starts with the question of how much do you charge?
Yeah, very simple. You know, let me get an estimate to you, but let me ask you some things about the shoot. Can you give me some more information? You know, that conversation typically starts with, hey Blake, I saw your website. I like your work. What's your day rate? And I think that's what that person's probably asking for. In other words, this person that asked this question. And basically what I let them know is that I don't have a day rate. I photograph by the shot. And let's talk about the job. Can you tell me a little bit about exactly what you have going on? My shot, I charge by the shot, and so let's get some information about where this is at. You know, and I mean, you know, face it. I mean, there's, you know, this whole sales negotiating thing. It's a numbers game. You're going to hear, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you're going to hear, I believe the numbers are a 14-to-1 ratio of no's to yes. And we need to get comfortable with, we need to start celebrating effort instead of celebrating success. And I think if we continue to celebrate effort instead of success, we will all be in a better frame of mind. You're not going to get them all. And I teased about aspiring to second. There's going to be times when you're trying to get your foot in the door someplace, and they're happy with their photographer. And in the past, I used to say, okay, well, all right. And why not say, you know what, if that photographer is ever not available, I'd like to be your guy. And that's what I mean when I say aspire to second. But I think overall we need to celebrate effort.
Okay. Jeanette Gonzalez asks, when a client is requesting information on behalf of someone else, for example, a sibling is paying for the wedding,
yep.
How do you convince the client to have the sibling give you a call for a consultation?
Yeah, I think all you can do is say, I'd like to, if it's possible, talk to your sister or your brother, and maybe get them in on the phone to call. Is there a good time that we could do that? Or what's a good time to do that? If you say, is there a good time to do that? That's a closed-end question. That's a yes or no. If instead you say, what's a good time? When is that person available? That's how you want to do that. And if she says, no, I'm just gathering information, say, well, I'd love to have her present, because I don't want you to forget anything that I'm talking to you about. I know you're going to do the best job you can, but there's a lot of details, and I'd love to be able to talk to the person. When's a good time? Would tonight at 6 o'clock work, or maybe does your brother work late? Should we do it at 8 o'clock? And give them two choices. I have a 7-year-old son. I give him two choices on everything. So maybe that would be a way that you might be able to do that. What would work better for us, 6 or 8 tonight?
Okay, awesome. Well, I got to say, Blake, thank you so much. The information was really, really great, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this. There's lots more. There's the video. Some people were sending me notes that they weren't seeing the video; they were only hearing the audio. And if you are one of those people, then have no fear. The video itself will be up on the PhotoShelter blog in the next couple of days, so you'll be able to see the video. And also available from PhotoShelter, if you haven't been there yet, is the reports page. So if you want to check out our numerous research reports that we've been putting together for people about the photography industry and how to better your marketing and business, make sure you go there and check out what we have available. Again, our blog.photoshelter.com is where we will have this video posted. And if you want to keep in touch with us on Facebook, do so at facebook.com/photoshelter or at Twitter at @photoshelter. So thanks again, and thanks Blake. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rover.